Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient shoot tongue and myth busting. And on the program, we are rejoined by our returning champion, Ken Stone, who is part of the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War, which is one of the best, one of the most radical, and I say that as a compliment and in a very good way. But yeah, one of the best anti-imperialist groups in which social justice, socialism, and solidarity to all oppressed people in Canada and abroad is at the core of its philosophy and founding. And yeah, it's our All Things Canada edition. And let's get straight to it. First off, Ken, thank you so much for coming back on the program.
My pleasure. Anytime, Youri.
Oh, always an honor to have you on. And Ken, so the first thing, the first thing I wanted to talk to you about is your organization is helping organize a nationwide tour for a good comrade of ours, Dimitri Lascaris. He went through a whole lot of flack and a whole lot of cancel culture and smear merchants when he was talking about the very thorny topic of Ukraine, even though if you look at all of his presentations, he's talking about how we can have peace. And now, of course, Dimitri is going to take on the very thorny topic of Palestine, except the only difference is the people power movement and the anti-imperialist movement is far and more advanced on Palestine. And as we can see with the mass mobilization, the people have voted with their feet, and they are saying not just a ceasefire, but they are saying justice for the Palestinians, nationhood for the Palestinians, one democratic state solution for the Palestinians, and go back to the 1967 borders and Israel BDS on you. So talk to us about this planned nationwide tour our good friend Dimitri is doing when it comes to the issue of Palestine.
Dimitri, who is a Canadian activist extraordinaire, a journalist, a retired lawyer with a very good reputation in Canada. He was the leading class action lawyer in Canada. He's retired now, but he still takes on cases for Palestinian solidarity activists who get in trouble with the authorities over their activism, and he helps them almost entirely pro bono. So he has not given up the practice of law in Canada at all. Right now, Dimitri is in Istanbul, Turkey, and he is among the people who are trying to sail from Turkey on the Freedom Flotilla. There's a Canada boat to Gaza, and he's one of the crew members, and this is his second time on the Freedom Flotilla, and they're trying to sail from a port in Turkey to Gaza to bring hundreds of tons of medical supplies and food to the starving people of Gaza who are under a genocidal attack by the apartheid Israeli regime. And right now, Israel has managed to throw a spanner in the works by persuading Guinea-Bissau to remove the flag from two of the ships in the Freedom Flotilla, and that's what's holding things up. So that's why Dimitri's in Istanbul, and they're having demonstrations and trying to put pressure on the Turkish government to release the boats from harbor and let them sail to Gaza. Following before this current event, Dimitri had made a tour at his own expense, as usual, extensively throughout West Asia, including Palestine, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and he went upon his return from the Canada boat to Gaza. He will be undertaking a 2024 Canada-wide tour, speaking tour on the subject of Palestine, and the exact topic is Palestine: genocide and resistance - the big picture in West Asia. And there is a website which I've given to you, Youri, where we've got most of the posters, handbills, and the information stored up. And it's called peoplesstrike peoplestrike.ca. And there's an S on people and an S on strike. So it's two S's, peoplestrike.ca. And of course, people can go to the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War website and our Facebook page, our Twitter account, and you can get the information about the national tour and about Dimitri's stop in Hamilton. The tour starts in Toronto on May 14th, and it comes to Hamilton on May 15th, and we are very much looking forward to it. But I'll tell you, I've had 4 halls so far refuse to have Dimitri. 4 so far. We do have a venue, and I'm pretty sure that this venue will not cancel. But we are always careful about how we do things. And the fact is that the opposition, the Zionist lobby in Canada, the pro-Israel lobby, has 50 or 60 people in suits full time working for CIJA, the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, B'nai B'rith, and a whole slew of other so-called charitable institutions, Simon Wiesenthal Center, etc. And they have people full time to get on the phone and pay visits to places to put pressure on them to cancel Dimitri and other people who are speaking out against the Zionist brutality in Gaza. So despite all the pressure, and just the same as we did it last year, we are going to have this tour come hell or high water, and Dimitri will get to speak in 13 cities across the country, followed by a webinar for those people who aren't in those 13 cities.
Fantastic. So I'll make sure to check out those events when they're being live streamed. So yeah, and I wish the best of luck to you and your team and to Dimitri as you do this. I have to ask them this follow-up question. I was pretty shocked at just how much hostility and attempts of cancel culture, many of them were successful. Others, you literally had the stand with the stand with Ukraine crowd literally literally heckling Dimitri the entire time he was trying to give a presentation. Having watched his presentation when he was meeting with Peace Alliance Winnipeg and some of our comrades in Manitoba, listening to his entire presentation, I just could not understand why people were so angry when his entire presentation was how we can make peace between Russia and Ukraine and go forward. But that being said, do you think, given that this is that these are the biggest Palestine solidarity protests we've seen globally, we see this sea of avalanche where so many people are now unafraid to stick their necks out for Palestine. But do you still think that when you start this nationwide speaking tour with Dimitri, do you still think you're going to have a lot of counter protests and people trying to shut it down, and people even your response to that?
Well, just as there was opposition to Dimitri last summer over his cross-Canada tour, speaking about, the topic was making peace with Russia, one handshake at a time. And what Dimitri had done was he had undertaken a tour at his own expense, again, of citizen diplomacy to Russia. And he was trying to hear what the Russians were saying about this war in Ukraine, because you can't hear about it. You can't get that viewpoint here in Canada. You won't find it in the media. You won't find it anywhere. And anybody who tries to publish it is severely curtailed. And that's because there are strong vested interests in Canada that are promoting the war in Ukraine, which is using Ukraine and its people as a sacrificial lamb in NATO's attempt to spread eastward from Eastern Germany right up to the borders of Russia. And the game is the same game that they did in 1991 in Yugoslavia. It's dismantle the federation and then gobble up the pieces. That's what it's all about in Ukraine. And in Canada, we have the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, a vested interest that wants to, that's funded by the Canadian government, that wants to break up Russia and to use Ukraine as a battering ram against Russia. They are Banderites. They are the descendants of the Stepan Bandera and the pro-Nazi Ukrainian militias that joined with Hitler during World War II to fight the Soviet Union. And even after the war, they conducted a guerrilla campaign against the Soviet Union in Western Ukraine, and they killed tens of thousands of Jews and Poles and Ukrainians. And these are the grandchildren of those people. So there's a vested interest in Canada. The Canadian government is part of NATO. Canadian government does not have an independent foreign policy. We have a NATO foreign policy, and we get sucked into every war of the US empire, including the one in the Ukraine, where Ukraine is a proxy. And the Canadian government has spent over $10 billion of our taxpayers' money on this war and shows no sign of relenting in its support for Mr. Zelensky. So that was Ukraine. In the case of Palestine, there are also vested interests in Canada. There is a very strong pro-Israel lobby, and it's centered among the Jewish federations in the various cities of Canada, which are run by an old guard of pro-Zionist leaders that no longer represent the Jewish community in Canada. Exactly. These are people who, come from my generation or even the generation before me, who were fanatical Zionists, and their goal is to use the Canadian state as much as they can as their tool to promote
settler colonialism in Israel and completely eradicate and erase the Palestinians. And if they are crazy enough and the world gives them license enough, they would even like to see a greater Israel that would wipe out Lebanon and wipe out Iraq, and who knows, reclaim Judea and Samaria, if I have my notes correct on that.
You're absolutely right. And the sad fact is, once again, the Canadian government has no independence of foreign policy. Our foreign policy is generated in the US State Department or in the Pentagon, depending on the situation. And if Biden does X, Canada will do X plus one. So, if Biden is supporting with arms and military equipment Israel's genocidal attack on Gaza, Canada will not say a word against it. But there's been, as you say, mass protests in Canada. They happen every day practically, and certainly every weekend across the country. And just this week, there have been 2 encampments created in Montreal.
Yeah, at McGill University, and which is the other one?
Concordia. So one is an English university, and one is a French university. So it's happening at both of them. And I've been told, because of my connections in IJV, I am a founding member of IJV, and I'm still a member of IJV, that many of these students in these encampments are Jewish. So this is a very good development to see that Jewish students and other students of Arabic and other backgrounds are protesting in Quebec their universities, which conduct research and have direct ties to universities in Israel, which benefit from the apartheid regime. So these students are righteously indignant, and I heartily endorse their attitudes and their methods. They are trying to create a break between their universities and their counterparts in the Zionist state. But the Canadian government has felt the pressure, and they've done 2 things. One was that the federal NDP, and I'll give them credit for this, they they used one of their opposition days to hold a debate about Palestine. In 100 years, there has not been ever a debate on Palestine in the Canadian Parliament. And to their credit, they had it, a full day debate on Palestine. And the end result of it was all a mishmash of resolutions and amendments and everything.
Yeah.
But the end result of it was the Canadian government, the Trudeau government, undertook not to process any further arms shipments to Israel, though there are a whole bunch in the works right now. No further ones. That's something. And the other one was that the Trudeau government agreed to resume funding to UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for the Palestinian refugees,
which the Israeli government has accused of being part of the Palestinian resistance attack. But that's nonsense. But but they're under a lot of pressure to cut funding. But I have to ask then this question. This is a question I asked last night to Al Jones. Do you think that given that there's a lot of people in Canada protesting against Canadian foreign policy, particularly on Palestine, will this convert a lot of people? I hope more Black Canadians, but just in general, more people into the broader anti-imperialist movement. And yeah, I'm curious your response on that.
Yes, it will. It has changed forever. A whole generation of young people in Canada in their attitudes towards the state of Israel and Zionism in general, and probably towards the role that Canada plays in the world, a subservient role that Canada plays as a willing accomplice of U.S. imperialism around the world. So I don't think that those young people, and in their hundreds of thousands, are ever going to go back to thinking benign thoughts about Israel, and they're going to really question what is the role of Canada in international affairs. So I'm very hopeful. And you know what we're trying to do, all the peace movement and all the pro-Palestinian groups that I'm aware of, and independent Jewish voices, we're all trying to raise the level of consciousness among these people, saying, ceasefire now, free Palestine. Yes, for sure we want that, but we want also an end to the Zionist colonial project in Palestine. We want a Palestinian state. As you say, I'm agreeable with that one, a unilateral state, but a state for the Palestinians with its capital in Jerusalem, and with protection for the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the return of the Palestinian prisoners, an end to the illegal settlements in the West Bank,
and the right of return for Palestinians who have been displaced since 1945.
That's what I mean about the return of the Palestinians. Yes, absolutely. And so with Dimitri's tour, we're trying to also to get over the idea among certain people in the Palestinian movement here in Canada. They tend to regard Palestine as if it were an island in the South Pacific, without any not part of the West Asia, and no connection to Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Iran, Yemen. We're trying to show them that there is a resistance movement in West Asia, and that's what his interviews, if you've seen them, are with people who are actually in the resistance in West Asia. He went, and I think he's the first Canadian journalist ever to interview someone from Hezbollah.
Yeah.
He interviewed someone from a resistance party that wants to get the U.S. out of Iraq, and he interviewed people in Lebanon, about Israel's continuing attacks on all its neighbors. So we're trying to raise the level of consciousness through all that. And I do believe this will be something like the uprisings in the 1960s, where it changed a whole generation of young people and turned them into radicals.
That's actually a perfect segue. That is a perfect segue for this question I wanted to ask you, which is now, before this ridiculous, non-existent Chinese interference nothing burger of a scandal broke out in Canada. I want to talk a bit about that, but before we talk about that, before all of that happened, your organization, the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War, along with the Canadian Peace Congress, the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute, and the Canada-China Focus Group were all part of a campaign to free Meng Wanzhou, the either the CEO or the CFO of Huawei. Can you talk about? Can you talk briefly about that? And the reason why I want us to talk about that is a lot of times people find that there's no hope, that there's no hope in protesting, that even when you do protest, the protests are always small in Canada. And, I sometimes get told by people, like, why do you continue to do 1+1 when you have so little views? You don't even have, like, an audience of a Jimmy Dore. Don't you think that people just don't really care about it? But Ralph Nader, my hero Ralph Nader, once said that you actually don't need a Glastonbury full of people in order to change the world for a better place. So, given that your organization helped free Meng Wanzhou, and given that Fire this time, and I believe Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War and other people power movements in Canada got Alex Saab free, please explain to our audience how a small group of committed activism can change the world for a better place, and we may not be able to stop all of the injustices, but we are able to stop some of the injustices. And so, yes, talk to us about that.
Well, your listeners should know that Meng Wanzhou is the CFO, Chief Financial Officer of Huawei Technologies, the flagship tech company in China, which was in Canada. It had 1,400 employees, very well paid. I think the average salary was $65,000, and they were set up just north of Toronto in a town called Markham, which has a large Chinese population. And they had a research center there, 400 people, and they were providing 5G technology for Canada's 5G network. And they were a very good Canadian corporate entity. They even, at their own expense, built cell phone towers in the far, far north so that the Indigenous people of Canada could have connectivity. They did that for free. But
wow, interesting.
But when Donald Trump came to power, his goal was to create a trade war with China, and he saw an opportunity to kidnap Meng Wanzhou while she was on a tour or a business trip, which took her through Canada and various places. And there were 9 countries that she was on her itinerary, I believe, at the time. And so the United States approached all these 9 countries. And actually, I understand that her arrest warrant had been issued 6 months earlier in New York City. And that prior to her trip to Canada, they also approached other countries through which she had toured and visited on business. Huawei Technology is an international global company. And out of the 33 countries, not a single one would arrest Meng Wanzhou. Because why should they? Why should they pick a fight with China, the largest economy in the world and a rising power? But they found a willing toady in Ottawa by the name of Justin Trudeau. And so Justin Trudeau had Meng Wanzhou arrested while she was in transit at Vancouver Airport in December 18, 2021, I think, or was it 2019? I'm losing the track of time, but it doesn't matter.
Sometime before the pandemic.
Yes, it was before the pandemic. Maybe it was 2018. In any case, he had her arrested, and she was charged with a fraud, and that had to do with breaking the U.S. Economic sanctions on Iran.
Yeah.
And it was about a deal she had made in Hong Kong about Huawei's dealings in Iran. So the dealings didn't take place in the U.S. They didn't affect the U.S. This was something that she did in China about Iran. But the United States, because there was a transfer of money from China to Iran, which passed for 1 millisecond through the SWIFT network in New York City, the Americans said, we have jurisdiction. She committed a fraud. She broke the rules we have about sanctioning Iran. And so we want to arrest her. We want to extradite her to the United States from Canada, and we want to put her on trial for fraud. So this was a very big deal in Canada, and the Chinese retaliated by putting embargoes on Canadian canola, Canadian lobsters, Canadian pork, and so on.
And they apprehended two spies.
I'm sorry?
And they apprehended two spies, the Michaels.
Oh, well, I'm coming to that. And so it caused a lot of harm to Canadian farmers. A lot of harm. I mean, millions of them. And so there was a big debate in this country. Why should Canada get involved in this? Why should we be the toadies of the U.S., especially when it's hurting our own national interests? Up to then, Canada and China had 50 years of good relations and good trading relations. So, it was a very stupid move that only a vassal state would make at the request of the master state in order to shoot itself in the foot. And that's what it did. Well, then the Chinese decided, the Chinese looked around China and said, we used to think that the Canadians were our friends. Now we better take a look at the Canadians who are working here in China. And lo and behold, they found two guys, Michael Spavor and Michael, whatever his name was. I
believe Corvig. I think. Yeah.
That's right. And they looked at these two guys and they discovered that the one who was working in North Korea was sending information surreptitiously about Chinese and North Korean military information to Kovrig, that's his name, and Kovrig was sending it to the United States of America. Well, this is called espionage. And it turns out Kovrig had left his position as a Canadian diplomat and was freelancing with the International Crisis Group. The International Crisis Group is an NGO that works with the George Soros, and it's part of the contracted out spying system that's coordinated by the American Central Intelligence Agency. So they picked up these two guys and put them in jail. And all the anti-Chinese people in Canada started yelling and screaming that, oh, China is picking on two innocent Canadians, and they are blameless, they are guiltless, they're little white lambs, and the Chinese are just retaliating against the arrest of Meng Wanzhou. Well, the Chinese very clearly said there was no connection between the arrest of the two Michaels and Meng Wanzhou's kidnapping by the Trudeau government. But in the end, the Chinese government and the Canadian government came to an agreement, a prisoner exchange, and the two Michaels went back to Canada and Meng Wanzhou went to China, where she was received quite rightly as a heroine, with huge crowds coming to greet her. And I think that we didn't cause the Meng Wanzhou to be released as per se, but I think we were part of the action that made the Canadian government look bad to its own people. And so it was the work that we did on the Cross Canada campaign to free Meng Wanzhou helped to persuade the Trudeau government that the best way to end this thing is to give Meng Wanzhou back and get the two Michaels back. And at the time, we had no proof, no real proof that the two of them were spies. But 2 years later, it turns out that Michael Spavor is suing Michael Kovrig for his incarceration in China, because unknown to Spavor, who was based in North Korea, the information he was sending to Kovrig, he didn't know that Kovrig was sending it to the CIA. So he blames Kovrig, and he's suing Kovrig for, misleading him and causing him to be put in jail for about, 800 to 1,000 days, suing him for millions of dollars. So the truth finally came out that both of them were involved in espionage. It's as clear as a bell.
And now that's a perfect segue into the BS of Chinese interference in the in the sacred Canadian general election that saw Trudeau get reelected. And what is the latest that's happening with that inquiry? And I believe I read something, or well, I didn't read it closely, but I got a headline from the Canada Files, which said that some of the Hong Kong diaspora separatist groups backed by the West, and some of the Uighur rights groups also funded to the teat by Canada and the U.S., the CIA front groups, and apparently they did not want to be cross-examined in the inquiry, so they pulled out. I find that strange, given that the whole frame up of this non-existent Chinese interference in the Canadian elections, it's made to make them look good, and unfortunately most of the Canadian politicians from the Liberals to the Greens, to the NDP, to the Quebec Bloc are all hostile towards China and all de facto support the pivot to Asia. So why that? And so I would have thought that they would have given them nothing but softball questions and just allow them to slander China as this barbarian country that does genocide against its Uyghur people, that wants to destroy Hong Kong and so forth. So I'm curious your response on why you think these groups didn't want to be cross-examined, even if it was just going to be given a slap on the wrist sort of thing.
I think that you've got it just right when you said this is a nothing burger investigation. That is a perfect description of what is going on. It is part of a developing new Cold War between Canada, the U.S., the Five Eyes network, and China. And I would describe this foreign interference inquiry to be a witch hunt. It's a witch hunt in which all the evidence is manufactured by the intelligence community in Canada, specifically CSIS, the Canadian Security and Intelligence Service. They started this inquiry. The impetus for this inquiry were leaks that were given from CSIS to the Globe and Mail. And there was a series of them that for about 6 months. And in all this 6 months, the spy agency could not find the leaker, but the leaker managed to leak things almost every single day, maybe, or at least twice a week, to the Globe and Mail. The Globe and Mail never said the name of the leaker, his or her position, how they got this information, and the bigger question is how they still keep their bloody job. leaking security information. Well, so that's how this inquiry got started. And they brought in these Uighur separatists and these Hong Kong separatists who are to a person on the payroll of the West, either in Canada on CSIS or the CIA in the United States. These are to a person paid agents. And these people had made testimony, and when they didn't get their way exactly in the hearing, they threw a petulant fit, and they said, if we can't do this or that, we're leaving this inquiry. Now, I'm not sure, maybe somebody might have asked them, where are you getting your money from? How did you get here? You know, how did you get from the middle of a demonstration in Hong Kong to Ottawa? You know, how do you do that? Please explain. And how you were involved in Uighur activities over in Central Asia, and you ended up in Ottawa. How did you do that? And who paid? And, you know, where did you get the passport? And, you know, all this kind of stuff. So I think probably they were unhappy that they didn't get their way, because there were a few interveners like Senator Wu and other people who were going to ask them some very embarrassing questions. And so they quit. But that was a sideshow. It was interesting, but it was a sideshow. The main thing is that they, in my view, what the inquiry showed was that there is no information whatsoever implicating China in interfering in Canadian elections. And of course, it's ridiculous to even think that China would be interested in interfering in Canadian elections. China always has a policy of non-interference in other people's internal affairs, because for over a century, Western imperialists imposed a century of humiliation and occupation. They chopped up China into pieces, they occupied it, and they drained it of all its wealth for over a century. And they killed millions of Chinese people. So the Chinese have ever since had a policy of non-interference. The kinds of stupid things that they've said at this inquiry. One MP, his name is Michael Chung from up here in Guelph or Elora, he says that the Chinese were attempting to kill him. Really? Come on, give me a break. Give me a break. The Chinese have no interest in killing Canadian MPs. They could not care less. They called Justin Trudeau Mr. Small Potato. That's his nickname in China. They could not give a damn. The only thing that they're interested in Canada about is getting pork and canola and lobsters, and, you know, being able to invest in getting coal and other minerals. And well, what's happening is that CSIS is creating stories which Trudeau himself in the chair as a witness at this inquiry said they didn't have confidence in the reports of CSIS. He was given reports weekly or maybe daily, I can't remember, and the Trudeau government and his chief honcho, a woman whose name escapes me at the moment, his chief attaché, they testified, both of them, they did not have confidence in the CSIS reports. They thought the reports were exaggerated or being made up. And so that's why I think your definition or your description of this inquiry as a nothing burger is 100% accurate. They're talking about Chinese influence in the 2019 and 2021 elections with the grand total sum they're kicking around of $250,000. Can you imagine trying to influence the Canadian election with $250,000? That could be maybe one constituency if you had that much money. And they haven't proved any money trail. It's just stuff they're pulling out of their hats. And
but
so
why?
I think the commission, the inquiry has temporarily taken a pause, but the fact is, and most Canadians haven't got the time for it, but it's on every news report every day when it's in session. So the purpose of this inquiry is not to get to any truth. That's not the purpose of the inquiry. The purpose of the inquiry is to demonize China. If you can say often enough that money is coming in, that MP is being threatened with death, that another MP got elected because he had Chinese money, and a third MP lost because the Chinese government tried to prevent his election, which is really sour grapes. Then, people get the idea that China is bad. And that's the message that's trying to be sent by this foreign interference inquiry scam. It's a witch hunt.
But what do you think is going behind the scenes with the elites? Because now Justin Trudeau has always been very supportive of the pivot to Asia. I mean, his government has backed the very right wing Hong Kong separatist movement, as well as the Uighur separatist movement, which are a bunch of wolves in sheep's clothing. They have participated.
They're terrorists. They're terrorists.
So, so what do you think is going on? Like, is there a faction of the Canadian deep state and the war machine that just thinks that Justin Trudeau is too soft on China, ergo do a little bit of a divide and conquer amongst the elites, and part of me, and part of me thinks that if hypothetically there was a general election and the Liberals lose, this is all part of trying to make Trudeau lose, so that maybe somebody like a Chrystia Freeland becomes leader of the Liberal Party, and Pierre Poilievre, just becomes either, if not a one-term prime minister, certainly one who's going to get the ball rolling on, heaven forbid, a hot war with China via Taiwan, or even through some oh my gosh, the Chinese have just been harassing our boats, and then before you know it, escalation.
Actually, it's the other way around. Due to Canada's new Indo-Pacific foreign policy, Canada is spending $500 million to keep at least one warship in the Straits of Taiwan, somewhere along the South Chinese Sea, in the Straits of Taiwan, just to make the point that that China is dangerous and needs to be contained. You don't see any Chinese destroyers in the Straits of Juan de Fuca off between Vancouver Island and the mainland. That's because the Chinese don't do that kind of thing. They don't look to stick their noses in the internal affairs of other countries, but Canada does. And Canada also has a ship that they keep off of North Korea to harass with the Americans, the North Korean government. And Canada says the UN allowed us to. The UN told us to. But the truth is, as it was well exposed by Eve Engler, that the UN resolution doesn't have anything in there about Canada sending a military vessel close to the shores of North Korea. This is just saber rattling. And it's part of Canada's new defense policy and Canada's new policy on NATO, which defines Russia and China as security threats. Okay? They don't use the word enemies per se, but they describe them as threats to Canada's security. And so this is all part, as you say, of Obama's pivot to Asia. And Canada is in there, as usual, like a dirty shirt. So what I would say about this, about the whole package, is that what we need in Canada here is an independent foreign policy, one that tries to be friendly with all the countries in the world and tries to have good trading relationships with them as well, because we benefit with this. Instead of making wars, we should be using the resources of the world to cooperate to mitigate against the growing existential crisis of a possible environmental collapse. We can learn a lot from the Chinese because they have the best solar energy system in the world. We could benefit from learning about that. They also are developing new non-uranium reactors, which do not lead to the production of nuclear weapons. Why don't we just cut the tie with the sinking U.S. ship and float on our own and try and be available to go to any port in the world and trade and be friends with all the countries of the world?
Yeah, well, peace doesn't sell, though. And Canada. I think we have that. I think Canada has that British hangover. One characteristics about about England. I love England, but this is just the truth. Is the Brits tend to make their lives way more complicated than need be. Americans also tend to make their lives way more complicated than need be. And Canada, I guess, it's just influenced like that. But I have to ask these three quick last questions as as the hours. Oh my gosh, the hour's already up. Is number one, when it comes to Israel Palestine, a lot of people say that that the Liberal Party, Democrats, and all of these liberal and center left parties should pay a political price for their complicity in the genocide of Palestine. So that being said, but that being said, people would counter that by saying, well, the conservatives are even going to be more anti-Palestinian than the liberals, who, yes, they're awful, but we would rather sit across the table from them and try to talk sense into them and the diet liberal, NDP, as opposed to the conservatives. And of course, in America, the choices are Genocide Joe or dodgy Donnie Trump, who wants to eradicate wokeism and cultural Marxists and terrorist lovers. So I'm curious, what advice you would give to somebody who does want to punish the Democrats and similar parties, but doesn't want to give but doesn't want to empower a more reactionary rival oligarch warmongering party.
Well, I think it's true in the U.S. As it is in Canada. There is no party that represents the people who are actually demonstrating in the streets today in both countries and around the world, namely the ordinary pro-Palestinian solidarity activists and people who are campaigning for justice. I think that it requires, at this point, building a mass movement among the grassroots, developing peace organizations and working in trade unions, and eventually forming new political parties. Dimitri tried to do that in Canada. He ran for the leadership of the Green Party and he missed by a whisker. The Green Party would have been a different organization if Dimitri had won, and it's a shame he didn't. Hopefully he will run for election at some point in the future. In the States, there is an alternative, but you wouldn't know it if you didn't have some inside information, because the media shuts her out all the time. Jill Stein is running once again for president of the US. And by God, if she were to be elected, it would be a much better world that we live in.
And not just her. I also want to plug Party for Socialism and Liberation, Claudia de la Cruz and Karina Garcia, also fantastic people involved with many people in the activism world and in the journalism world who do, brilliant.
And there are new parties springing up in Europe too. Wagenknecht, Sarah Wagenknecht is starting a new party in Germany, an anti-war party. So it's happening. And then we're a little bit behind the times in Canada. We need to have a grassroots movement, and at some point, a new party will spring into life.
Alrighty. And when it comes to the actually, I'll ask another question about Israel and Palestine, which is which is the following: could we really see the end of Palestine as we know it? No hope for the democratic secular one state solution, which a lot of which a lot of groups which claim they're in solidarity with the Palestinians kneecap that demand and keep shutting that demand, which Palestinian civil society has said, part of our demands for boycott, divestment, and sanctions is we believe in the democratic one state solution that will take care of the thorny issue of the Palestinian diaspora and the right of return. But there are but there are still some people who claim to be the voice of Palestinians and Palestine solidarity who don't believe in the democratic one state solution. Our own political leaders, even when we push them to criticize Israel mildly, are still propping up the two-state delusion without even saying, how are you going to dismantle all of those illegal settlements? And even Israeli parties that claim they're for the two-state solution, Labor, Yair Lapid, Blue and White Party, they claim they're for the two-state solution. But then when you ask, then when you ask them, are you going to get rid of illegal settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem? They say hell no. They basically say hell no. They say East Jerusalem non-negotiable, and as for the West Bank, yeah. So
well, I'll tell you this, Youri, and concluding the interview. Number one, that it was a big mistake for the U.S. to use its veto about a week ago in the United Nations Security Council when there was a vote to admit Palestine as a full member of the UN. It wouldn't have meant much on the ground, but it was an important symbolic thing that the U.S. Prevent from happening. I think that the U.S. is getting more and more isolated, and so is its client state called Israel. And in fact, I do believe that in the context of this war in Palestine against Gaza, where the Israeli army is not winning against Hamas, and it's not winning against Hezbollah in the north, and it's not winning against Ansar Allah in Yemen, and it's losing the economic war, and people are leaving. Flight loads of Israelis are getting on planes and leaving. Jewish Israelis are getting on planes and leaving the country, and Israel has also lost the propaganda war. I think that the days of the Israeli apartheid regime are numbered. And that doesn't mean that I want to kill all the Jews or anything, or push them into the sea or any of that nonsense. I'm Jewish myself. I do believe it will mean that there will be a change similar that took place in the early 1990s in South Africa. There will be an end to the apartheid regime, and then there will be a new state in Palestine, which hopefully will represent all the citizens who live in historic Palestine, including the Palestinians who were kicked out in the Nakba in 1947. I'm hopeful for the future that this war marks the end of the Israeli apartheid regime.
And do you see that hope because of the global, not just the mass protests that we see across Turtle Island and Britain, Western Europe, and even Eastern Europe, Australia, New Zealand? But do you have hope because of the fact that globally much of humanity is on the side of the Palestinians, and the fact that South Africa took it upon itself to bring Israel to court. Nicaragua, which is being attacked. It's the 1980s Cold War all over again. But the Sandinista government of Daniela Ortega suing Germany, suing my father's country of the Netherlands for their complicity in the genocide in Gaza. Do you think because of that, uh, the Lord works in mysterious ways, and we actually will see an advancement of Palestine, of justice for the Palestinians?
Inshallah, yes. I do believe I do believe that's happening. It's you said much of the world supports Palestine. Actually, most of the world supports Palestine. It's only in Western Europe and North America that Israel finds any real support. 85% of the world supports Palestine and opposes the Israeli colonial project there. It's an anti-imperialist project, an anti-colonial project, and that's why most of the world identifies with Palestine. And I think that the apartheid regime in Israel is not a viable state any longer. And I really do believe that its days are numbered.
And final question, Ukraine, any chance that we will see an end to that awful war between Ukraine and Russia, and peace between the Ukrainians, or is that still on the or is that still a very bleak prospect that the bloodshed will end anytime soon?
Well, I'm afraid that despite the best efforts of the Chinese and the Russians to try and find a peace agreement with Ukraine, that Ukraine is merely a pawn, and NATO will not allow it to seek peace. The NATO will fight until the very last Ukrainian is dead, and they're now even sending in NATO soldiers from France and several other countries into Ukraine. So I do believe that the chance for peace is over, and I believe that the Russians will advance, and they will take most or all of Ukraine, and that's when the fighting will be over, because the NATO has shown by the Nord Stream sabotage, by the attacks on the Crimea Bridge, by the terrorist attack on the Crocus Hall in Moscow, by the launching of long-range missiles from Ukraine, that there is no chance anymore of a Ukrainian government being in power in Kiev that is aligned to the West. And so I'm afraid that the way that this war is going to end is with a Russian advance over much or most of Ukraine, pushing NATO back west.
Wow, that's very sad. So as much as it's great that we see all this protest against Palestine, I guess the only advice we can sort of give to people is while you're at those protests, do slip in anti-NATO messages, anti pro détente with China messages, because I will. Nuclear holocaust.
It's a possibility. It's a possibility. Unfortunately.
So the peace movement. So the peace movement needs to definitely step up its.
Well, we're doing our best in the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network to bring up the need for an end for Canada's support for the war in Ukraine, because this is with the F-16s and with long-range missiles and with the insertion of NATO troops into Ukraine, we are heading down the garden path towards a much bigger conflagration, which could end anywhere, even up to and including a nuclear war. So we're trying in the peace movement to make Canadians aware that there is this danger, and they need to wake up and send a message to Ottawa: get out of NATO now. There will be a counter summit in Washington, D.C., July 6th and 7th, because NATO is celebrating its 75th anniversary with a big summit in Washington. And so there will be a counter summit, and Canadian peace activists are going to it. I think there's a bus or carpooling. I'm not sure how we're getting there yet. And there will be demonstrations in Canada to support the counter summit. We're trying to make the point here that our lives and deaths depend on getting Canada out of this imperial alliance that drags us into every war of the US empire and could bring about a nuclear holocaust.
Well, Ken, keep up with the great work that you're doing. We were joined on this edition of 1+1 with Ken Stone of the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War. And Ken, just before I stop recording, remind people about Dimitri's speaking tour that's going to be happening in Canada.
Okay, people can go to our website. I hope it's if it's not posted now, it'll be posted today because we just got the final poster. hcsw.ca, or you can type the whole thing in there, Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War.ca, and we will have the information about Hamilton. And we also have a Facebook page and a Twitter account, and the tour has its own website, which is called peoplesstrike.ca. Peoples with an S, strike with an S, so there's two S's there, peoplesstrike.ca, and people can get all the information they need there.
Oh, and just a reminder, and on May 4th, I am going to be moderating a debate with the organization World Beyond War. We're going to be revisiting the topic, are wars ever justifiable? Is it better large-scale violence or mass non-violent resistance? It's going to be between two great anti-imperialist voices, Jared Ball, frequent guest on this show of I Mix What I Like at Black Power Media, and of course, David Swanson, the executive director of World Beyond War and the host of Talk World Radio. I'll make sure to send the link there so that people can register. And until then, Ken, you keep up the great work, and I look forward to having you back on the program, and you give my best to your team, and you give my best to Dimitri, all right?
I will.